If you are advocating the use of political force, then it's up to you to prove it's justified. Not merely that the goal sounds compassionate. You are proposing that people be compelled to obey your plan, so the burden belongs to you to prove the plan is safe. And nobody can meet that burden. Even the most modest political goals eventually require enormous amounts of coercion. It might only be providing people so called basic needs, or only protecting a vulnerable group, or only ensuring that every family has a plot of land. The goal may sound humble, but the intervention never remains humble. Mises demonstrated this with the example of price controls. Suppose the government decides that milk is too expensive and imposes a maximum price. That appears to be one small rule affecting one product. But at the lower price, consumers demand more milk, while producers have less reason to supply it, creating a shortage. The government must then either repeal the control or intervene again. To keep farmers producing milk at the controlled price, it now has to control their costs. It may begin by regulating the price of cattle feed, but cattle feed producers then have less reason to produce or sell to dairy farmers. The controls must therefore spread backwards through grain, fertilizer, fuel, transportation, labor, equipment, and land. The government begins by regulating the price of a carton of milk and ends up directing the decisions of nearly everyone involved in bringing it to the shelf. But even that is not enough because producers may reduce quality, leave the industry, sell elsewhere, or redirect their resources towards more profitable uses. The government must therefore impose production quotas, restrict exports, ration supplies, and police side payments in black markets. Each attempt to preserve the original price ceiling requires another restriction on how people may use their labor, property, and resources. Every new rule must then be written, administered, inspected, and enforced. Violations must be investigated, offenders prosecuted, and anyone who refuses to cooperate punished. What began as a ceiling on the price of milk creates new offenses, new enforcement powers, and an ever-expanding bureaucracy empowered to direct an ever larger portion of the economy. At the same time, the controls destroy the information people would otherwise have used to respond voluntarily. Prices communicate scarcity, demand, alternative uses, and the urgency of competing plans. By politically falsifying the prices of milk, feed, fuel, labor, land, and transportation, the state conceals the very conditions it is trying to manage. Shortages and distortions then appear elsewhere, prompting still more interventions. Officials understand progressively less about what is happening while claiming progressively more authority to control it. There is no isolated intervention. There is no tiny switch politicians can flip without changing everything connected to it. So anyone claiming to have a simple, humble political goal should have to account for every potential consequence. If you're going to give us ultimatums like taking a road trip with your family versus saving the planet like Canadian Health Minister Mark Holland did, then prove that you can trace the consequences of your policy perpetually into the future. If you expect everyone else to become a consequentialist with you, you don't get to count only the consequences you want. You must account for the opportunities people lose, the choices they can no longer make, the costs displaced elsewhere, the incentives you alter, the shortages you create, the price signals you distort, the powers the government acquires, and the next intervention that will be proposed when the first one fails. But statists never feel pressure to do this. They often don't even recognize that unintended consequences are possible, much less that the burden should be on them to prove that their intervention is safe. This is why I like the clip of Lily Tang Williams confronting David Hogg during a gun control debate at Dartmouth. Williams, who grew up under communism in China, asked whether he could guarantee that the United States government would never become tyrannical. Hogg admitted that he could not. Williams responded, "Well, then the debate on gun control is over because I will never give up my guns." That is the correct burden of proof. You are demanding that people surrender their ability to resist political power, so prove that political power has been permanently made safe. Prove that you have fixed the government. Prove that the authority you create will never expand, be abused, fall into different hands, or be used for anything beyond the modest purpose you are promising today. The same burden applies to the supposedly gentler political projects becoming fashionable again, like distributism. Perhaps the stated goal is merely to ensure that every family owns property or a plot of land. That sounds humane, restrained, and almost apolitical. But how would that distribution be created and maintained? Who decides how much land each family should have? Which land may be divided? Which businesses are too large? Which inheritances are permitted? Which contracts concentrate ownership too much? And whether people are using their property in the approved way? And what happens when people voluntarily sell their land, combined efforts, move into cities, rent rather than own, or organize production in ways that recreate the concentrations distributists wanted to eliminate. Either the preferred pattern is allowed to disappear, or the state must intervene continuously to preserve it. The modest promise of spreading property more widely becomes permanent control over property, and in doing so, it suppresses the price signals that would otherwise reveal which arrangements people prefer and which uses of resources are most valuable. A compassionate objective does not give you the right to use force. If you want to compel everyone else to obey your plan, the burden is on you to prove that the coercion is justified and that you understand the consequences it will produce. So before you tell me that the government should do just one thing, whether it's redistribute land, regulate one price, protect one group, or save the planet, prove to me you have fixed the government. Prove that the intervention will remain small. Prove that you understand every distortion it will create. Prove that its powers will not extend to people and activities you never intended to control. And prove that when it fails, you will abandon it instead of using that failure to demand even more authority. People with supposedly modest political goals believe that the modesty of the goal makes the power modest too. It never does. So there is no such thing as a simple intervention, and there is no such thing as a humble statist.